The Republican National Convention in Milwaukee is wrapping up, and critics of former President Trump lined up to pledge their full support. It's a sharp turn from the likes of Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, who attacked the former president on the campaign trail earlier this year. The former presidential hopefuls took to the stage and made it clear that Republicans are standing united, confident Trump will win the Oval Office this November.
Donald Trump has my strong endorsement, period.
My fellow Republicans, let's send Joe Biden back to his basement and let's send Donald Trump back to the White House.
Kicking off the week by announcing Ohio Senator J.D. Vance as his vice presidential pick.
I am proud to announce that Senator J.D. Vance has the overwhelming support of this convention to be the next vice president of the United States.
Trump arrived on day one to massive cheers from the crowd.
We are here tonight with one purpose, and that is to elect Donald J. Trump as the next president of the United States.
Bringing a united energy to the convention just days after an attempted assassination on his life in Pennsylvania. Republicans are banding together, confident that a red wave will sweep the U.S. election cycle. And it comes with good reason. The latest polling continues to show former President Trump is leading nationwide. It's time to go on the record with Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science from Decision Desk HQ. Scott, thank you for joining us during this very busy news week. We're going to kick it off with the Veep stakes. Former President Trump has officially picked Ohio Senator J.D. Vance to be his running mate. We know that Vance has been a rising star in the Republican Party since he was elected to the Senate in 2022, but he's only 39 years old and relatively inexperienced. Scott, were you surprised by this pick, and do you think his young age was a factor in that this could signal Trump passing the torch to a new face of the MAGA movement?
Yeah, it was not surprising. I mean, he's been a top choice, or at least top talked about the last few months. Ohio is not a state that Donald Trump is in danger of losing. As you pointed out, he's pretty young. The voters don't know a lot about him. If you look at Republicans have a decent idea who he is, but when you look at favorability ratings for J.D. Vance, over 40% of voters don't have an opinion of him yet. So that's a blank slate. That's an opportunity for the Trump campaign to put a fresh face out there and give voters someone to look at. Someone new that they don't have an opinion of, and see if they like his policies and what he's about to say. I do know the Trump campaign says they're going to place him in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan. Those are key states. I'm sure we'll talk about that soon. But he is supposed to be able to appeal to those rural voters, and we'll see if it's going to happen.
Yeah, interestingly enough, last week, the Biden campaign said that the president's path to victory runs through Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So definitely must-win seats for both sides of the aisle this election. So, Scott, I know it's been only less than 24 hours since J.D. Vance was chosen to be Trump's running mate. But do you have any indication of what forecasting shows for Republicans' chances now that Vance is on the ticket?
You know what? The forecast hasn't moved in anything direct from J.D. Vance. But what I would say is this: it's probably an unknown right now, simply because over 40% of Americans don't have an opinion on him. So it could be bad, could be good for the forecast for Donald Trump. But they're going to have hundreds of millions of dollars, and he's going to have a lot of airtime over the next few months to get his first impression. And I'm certain he will have an impact, just because of how vocal he is, and how in a contrast in age and some of his positions are going to sound as they come out over the next couple months.
Absolutely. And Democrats already on the defense, with the DNC launching their first paid media campaign against the Trump-Vance ticket. So it's already off to the races on that front. So I want to turn our attention to a new YouGov survey for the Times that shows Trump is leading in all 7 swing states. Is this in line with Decision Desk's forecasting?
Yeah, so it's interesting that those polls are very good for Trump at the state level. We're looking at the polling aggregation, the Hill polling averages. And especially that one in Pennsylvania. I mean, that's just another great poll for Donald Trump in a state that he absolutely has to win. What's interesting happening at the national level is generic ballot, just general opinion of Republicans and Democrats, which is a major input for the model, has gotten a little better for Joe Biden over the last week or so. And that's generic ballot. That doesn't mean that people specifically like Joe Biden or specifically like a certain person. It's just the voters' feelings of the Democratic Party or Republican Party. That has gotten a little better over the last week or so, and that has counteracted some of these state polls. So that's kind of what we're seeing at the forecast level. Still Donald Trump favored, but we're seeing a little bit of a branding for the Democrats at the national level. But at the state level, where it matters in the presidency, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, those polls from the New York Times, not good.
Yeah. I want to move back to J.D. Vance. We remember when he rose to fame in 2016 after releasing his book, Hillbilly Elegy, that essentially detailed his experiences growing up in Ohio and Kentucky in a working class community. But I am old enough to remember that in that book, he was very critical of Trump and his popularity among the working class white vote. And we also remember when J.D. Vance would go on cable news and, frequently bash Donald Trump in the early stages of his 2016 campaign. He's compared him to Hitler. He's called him an idiot. It's been quite the political evolution for Senator Vance. How did he manage to get back into the good graces of the MAGA movement? I mean, as someone who's followed him for a few years now, it seems to have begun when he thought about running for Senate in Ohio.
Yeah, no, look, J.D. Vance, someone I've been watching too for a little while. I actually met him back when he was a venture capitalist here in the Washington, D.C. area. He is very good, just like Donald Trump, at reading the room. And he is very good. He's always wanted to be a politician. And so I think those two skills have kind of helped him figure out, okay, well, I want to be a Republican senator. I want to be a Republican nominee. Donald Trump is clearly taking over the party. And it all started with that endorsement he got in that Senate campaign that you mentioned. And ever since then, he talks about it pretty directly. He has a change of heart. He doesn't necessarily believe or think those things that he has said before. And he takes it head on. And it appears that Donald Trump takes him at his word. He's been able to take that message and really take the mantle of the MAGA movement. And at the end of the day, it'll be interesting to see where he takes it. Because as you point out, he's 39 years old. He is the presumptive GOP nominee frontrunner going into 2028 as of today as well.
So, yeah, we remember, Republicans are very much essentially saying that Vice President Harris and President Biden also went head to head in the 2020 primary. So they say bygones can be bygones and water under the bridge in politics. So speaking of President Biden, earlier this week during an interview with NBC's Lester Holt, President Biden was asked if he believed the assassination attempt on Trump has changed the trajectory of the race. His response was, quote, "I don't know, and you don't know either." Scott, is there any update on Decision Desk's forecasting of the presidential election since Saturday's shooting? Republicans I've been chatting with seem to think that this will be a big boon to Trump.
Yeah, no, I happen to agree. We've had exactly one poll post assassination attempt, so that's not necessarily enough data. But polls and forecasts are not good for these rapid movement events and things like that. And I imagine we're going to get some data in the next week or so as more and more organizations poll something like this. But at the end of the day, look, an event like that, an event that all of us are going to remember where we were 10, 15, 20 years from now, that is going to have a mark on Republican voters and, and even non-Republican voters. And it's going to be a rallying cry, certainly for the Republican base. And we're going to see that in the enthusiasm gap, I think, as we come out. So that's a long way of me saying is we haven't seen it in the forecast yet, but it wasn't trending good for Joe Biden post-debate. And this event is probably going to be a rallying cry and another good data point for Donald Trump as he, gears up post-convention.
So speaking of, the post-shooting impact on the election, we've all seen what has already been called an iconic photo by Republicans of President Trump with his fist in the air. His face is bloodied. That's from the shooting at his rally in Pennsylvania. What do you see this image doing for Republicans going forward? I mean, I imagine that this is going to be a major flashpoint in the campaign.
Yeah, campaign images are iconic. I'm sure we all remember. Most of us remember 2008, the Barack Obama, motif on a T-shirt, the Obey shirt. Barack Obama was an icon, and a brand coming out of 2008, and I kind of see that out of Donald Trump this cycle, especially after some of those photos and just him. We've all seen him walk in and out of a UFC fight and those types of adoration and people rallying around him, things like that. These photos are going to be something we're going to be looking at for 20 or 30 years, and the campaign was already using them in fundraising, and branding and merchandise. So it's certainly resonating, and it will be something we're going to look at and the campaign's going to use for the next few months.
Several Republicans and Democrats have called for the political rhetoric to be cooled down in the days after this shooting. President Biden has called for it. President Trump has called for unity. Do you think we're going to see that moving forward, or is this going to be something that we hear maybe for the next couple of weeks and, it sort of leaves our collective memory?
Yeah, I think this is something we're going to hear for a week or two, and then we're going to go back to where we were before. America's still pretty polarized. That's why we see, 30-40% of Democrats always sticking with their side, 30-40% of Republicans always sticking with theirs, and the rest of the middle, we pretty much know where they're going to end up. They're going to go where they went before. Polarization's here. It's on pause right now, but I think we're going to see the rhetoric come back to what it was before here in the next couple of weeks, because neither side wants to lose, and both sides are looking at this as an existential election for their respective parties.
Scott, the shooting happened on the heels of what was a really disastrous 2-week news cycle for President Biden, his campaign, his administration. And we were hearing these continuous calls from House Democrats and donors for Biden to drop out of the race. It seems that at least publicly, those calls have gone a bit quiet, but we understand that behind closed doors, that conversation is still very much happening. So what does Biden need to do now to move forward and stay in the race, particularly ahead of the Democratic National Convention next month?
Well, I was reading this morning they're going to try and do some virtual voting to solidify the nominee here at the end of the month, which they actually don't need to do. That was actually a potential response to the state of Ohio saying they're going to leave Joe Biden off the ballot unless he's the nominee. That law was changed, so they don't necessarily need to vote before the convention, but that is certainly something the Biden campaign's doing. They're trying to get that nomination so they don't have to wait another month for it and that chatter to continue. I've been hearing the same things you are. Nancy Pelosi certainly isn't a supporter behind the scenes. The calls that were happening Saturday before the assassination weren't necessarily good for Joe Biden. Everyone's on pause right now, but I think post RNC convention, I think you're going to see some of those calls and that chatter pick up again.
Scott Tranter, as always, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.